Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, everybody. This evening, we're going to talk about the hope that was generated by the visit of Pope Francis to Egypt. But we cannot talk about hope without sharing the pain. We cannot talk about hope for the Cairo without sharing the pain felt in Barcelona. We cannot but start from the reality. The reality today is being experienced all over the world, a reality which imposes the face of death. Death is in Barcelona. Death is in the Cairo. Death is in Aleppo. Death is in Tunis. Death is in Istanbul. You can die in a cafe, in a theater, in a park, in a stadium, in a street, in the subway. Death will take you by surprise. You cannot avoid death when it comes by chance. Your murderer does not know you. He who she has never seen your face, he or she has never heard your name. He or she doesn't know whether your death will make the hearts of those you love bleed, or whether it will make your enemies happy. He or she doesn't know your religion, your ethnic group, your gender. He or she doesn't know what's the good aspects of you and the bad aspects of your character. The murderer does not kill you. The murderer kills the life which is in you. The life. The suicide terrorists don't know anything about their victims. They only know themselves. Yet, what does he know about himself, pushing him to die? What does he know about himself, pushing him to escape from life? What he knows is hatred, not love. The murderer has died before he dies. It makes himself explode to escape this death. Your murderer offers you as a sacrifice to death. Who doesn't know love has no other way of saving himself than death. There is no resurrection for his soul, because the soul is the very tomb and the grave and the cage, the prison of a murderer. It is true that faith in love will not protect you from a bullet or from a splinter that can hit your heart, but it will protect your heart from death before death, from living life as a constant escape from death. Well, we are not here to escape death. In the previous session, with Father Stefano Alberto and Oliver Roy, it was clear that the void, the vacuum in the public space led to the vacuum in our heart. The vacuum in our heart, and with the vacuum in our hearts, the utopia of your ideology stopped. All we are left is death. Yet death, violence, not only cause, they are not the cause of this ideology, they are also the cause of the absence, and they cause the lack, they are the result of the lack of courage to announce that we believe in this love. It takes a presence to fill in this vacuum. If there is a lesson that we can learn from the visit of the Pope to Egypt, is this presence, being present in the simplest way possible. The Pope managed to conquer the hearts of the entire Egyptian population. He managed to fill in this void, this vacuum, to destroy stereotypes. Our speakers today will give us a testimony of what they've experienced personally. They were not invited because of their very high, of the important job they carry out. They were invited because of their role as protagonists in the reality that we are all living. They were invited as a real presence, which has managed to fill in this vacuum. Father Javier Prades is very well known here at the meeting. He's been attending the meeting for almost 20 years now. And he's a professor of theological sciences. He teaches theology, and he's also the chancellor at the University of Dámaso of Madrid. "11 years ago, Father Javier was to the Cairo, and he had the pleasure and the honor, I had the pleasure and the honor to invite him at my place, just a few days after my first daughter had born. When he came to my place, to my house, my mother saw he was wearing the garments of a priest, and so she said, "Did you invite a priest?" And I said, "Yes." He went to the room. She came with my daughter, and she asked in Arabic to bless her. He understood the Arabic sentence, and I saw that it was a little bit of a difficult moment for him, but he prayed for my daughter. Then, when he went out of my house, I asked my mother, "You created difficulty, you caused embarrassment to our guest, asking him to pray for our daughter." And my mother answered me, "You don't understand anything. A religious man loves us." And then when I spoke to Prades, to Father Prades, I spoke about this gesture of my mother, and I was confused because he wanted to bless my daughter, but he didn't want to make the sign of the cross because he didn't want to offend my mother. And so in the end, he decided to pray for my daughter with his hand open. I'm telling you this small anecdote because I want to show you the sensitivity of this man and the confidence and the desire and the trust which is lacking in this moment in our world. Our second speaker is Mr. Said Mahmoud. He is the editor-in-chief, editorial director of the Al-Ahram paper, one of the most important and renowned journalists in Egypt and in the entire Arab world. He also collaborates with many other newspapers of other Arab countries. And he was also invited because he has some very interesting remarks and for the articles he wrote on the visit of the Pope to Egypt. And then our third speaker, in Arabic, we say that the last one is the sweetest one, Mr. Feki, the director of the Library of Alexandria of Egypt. He is a very important academic. He was the chancellor in many universities in Egypt. He can boast many publications. He did his PhD on Christianity in the Middle Ages. He studied the conditions of Christian minorities in the Middle East. He spent half of the last century fighting to defend the right of Christian minorities in the Middle East. He was also the secretary in charge of information of the President of the Republic for over 10 years. Well, he had several important jobs at national and at international level. And he was not invited because of his importance as a professional. We did not invite the director of the glorious library of Alexandria of Egypt. We invited the intellectual, the courageous, the bold intellectual, who the day after the Pope's visit to Egypt called the Egyptian government to teach the Pope's speech in the public schools in Egypt. Therefore, we are not talking about a dialogue where there are two parties. It is a meeting between protagonists coming from different realities, but these protagonists play a very important role in the same cause, we may say. Let's start by leaving the floor to Father Javier Prades.
Now, first of all, let me warmly thank you, our friends of the meeting in Rimini, who once again have invited me here to participate in this splendid event of meeting and dialogue with the great world of culture and religion, especially at this time of a turning point, as Pope Francis likes saying. I'm really very honored to be able to share this panel with a dear friend of mine, Wael Farouq. I met him in Cairo, and actually he looked at my way of looking at the Muslim word. The gesture was imposing my hands, but as for the rest, it is true what he told you. And I'm very happy to be here with Mr. Mostafa Feki, director of Alexandria Library, and Syed Mahmoud, former deputy editor-in-chief of the weekly Al-Kahera. Pope Francis's journey to Egypt at the end of April provides some interesting interpretations to understand the future not only of this country, but of all the Middle East, and more in general, to promote coexistence between Islamic world and the Western world at the beginning of this century. We can see that there are many signs showing that this coexistence is fragile. To some extent, in some cases, there is permanent conflict. Just to quote some example, in 2017, Donald Trump's president tried to approve a decree to forbid and restrain the entry into the United States of citizens coming from Muslim countries. But this is not an isolated event. Marine Le Pen said that Islam influence is unbearable. She described France as a country that is called upon to make a choice of civilization. And this is not the only case in Europe. Other political leaders have openly spoken against Islam. Mistrust, lack of confidence are rooted very deeply. And this is fed by Islamic terrorism, which, as Wael said, strikes us all. This is also accompanied by the general suspicion accompanying the mass migration towards Europe and America coming from the wars in Iraq and Syria. This is a very delicate issue. It is not clear whether we are comparing cultures and civilization in general, or if we're thinking about just a religious problem. At first sight, it seems that the protagonists of these episodes perceive religion and social and political life as if they were one. This is why, if we want to be successful in Europe, we need to have a dialogue based on different voices involving secular and religious stakeholders. Until some years ago, the Western culture used to think that the tension produced by religion in public life was something belonging to an ancient world that was about to die, to leave room for a modern and secularized world. Using Ulrich Beck's words, and I quote, that was the idea that through modernization, the religious element would have been eliminated on its own. But actually, things show us that that was not the case. With reference to the latest report by the Pew Research Center on the evolution of religion in the world, Christianity and Islam together, without taking account of other religion, will account for almost 63% of the world population in 2060. So many important people, major experts of sociology, of religion, say that the assumption, the process of universal secularization is no longer sustainable. Hence, they claim a public role of religions in the modern world, like Casanova, or they talk about the several altars of modernity, like Berger, or they mentioned a second modernity with different types of secularization, like Ulrich Beck. At world level, religion does not disappear. On the contrary, it is expanding. In the West, rumors say that this social dissemination of religion can be seen, interpreted in two different ways. Religion can provide an effective contribution to peace or can multiply violence. This is a very delicate issue, and we cannot debate about this right now. I will just provide you some food for thought that may spur and promote dialogue. The internal evolution of Christianity and Islam and their mutual relation is absolutely interesting for the social debate in Europe, for the common social debate in Europe. Islam preaches a form of monotheism, wishing to reform and overcome a Jewish Christian monotheism. And that wants to be a universal truth, unlike, for example, the religions of the Far East. This is why the growing presence of Muslims in Europe, the peaceful presence of Muslims in Europe, opens up a debate. Is it possible that the West, Christian West, meets Islam, or are they condemned to conflict? European societies find it difficult to take on this difficult challenge. There are many differences among countries. In the light of what has already been suggested on secularization in the West, the dominant culture in Europe, in the West, has jeopardized the statements on man and God, which were universal, especially those concerning the religion in the West, as in Christianity. The political and cultural unity of faith in the Middle Ages came to a break following the reform, and that led to devastating wars for social life. This is why modern philosophy came about with the aim to overcome religious divisions and to propose different forms of coexistence. That was a very long process, a complex one, at the end of which a doubt was cast on the universal value of Christianity. And there were different forms of universality that did not take God into account. God's place was then taken on by the reason, and then by science, then by the state, history, race, and the market. Despite all these attempts, despite many attempts, in the end, in our society, many people talked about a modernity that was not met, as in the technical and scientific progress of Western Europe is very high level of social and economic development that many people envy, and therefore they want to come here and live and not go elsewhere, was not accompanied by a similar progress on the questions on the meaning of life and the meaning of God. The two terrible wars of the 20th century and totalitarianism have cast a shadow, a dark shadow, on all Europe. Islamic culture, however, also had a lot of problems in order to become a suitable interlocutor for Christianity. The revolutions over the past years came out of the fact that in this society there's a need for freedom and other social and economic rights. Many conflicts were born out of poverty, lack of opportunity, and in particular employment. This demand for effective freedom can be perceived in different ways. It might seem a threat to religious universality, which is deeply connected to the social order. So much so that religion can appear as a sort of belief secondary to the social order. Islam and Muslims will have to take on this challenge of freedom like we Europeans in the West and many Christians. And especially the issue of religious freedom, whereby human dignity has to be fully understood. Better civil participation can provide us with an answer to understand who the man of the third millennium will be. This is the same question that we also have here. Right now, there are more questions than answers, both in the Western world and, as far as I understand, in the Islamic world. Muslim presence in Europe shows that we no longer have a shared answer on the universal value of anthropology and religion in particular. So, starting from social and legal conquers of the latest century in Europe, it is now necessary to review the social model because it cannot take on the challenges related to the presence of Muslims in Europe. And the opposite also applies. The long journey made by the West provides gives a precious contribution to Muslim peoples. Christianity represents a wonderful opportunity for Islam, and in turn, Islam universalism makes us review the reasons of the cultural and anthropological crisis lived by the Christian Western world. Everyone understands the coexistence between Christians and Muslims has been very complex, sometimes violent. There are many suspicions that this is why the historic visit of Pope Francis to Egypt makes us decide whether we want to exclude each other or whether we want to promote a culture of dialogue. In line with what Cardinal Scola said, the process of mix between civilization and cultures based on real experiences and conflicts existing between Europe and the Middle East. So it would be interesting to ask a question in the light of the recent visit of the Pope to Egypt. What contribution can the Pope's journey to Egypt offer for a better understanding between Christians and Muslims in the 21st century? And I will give you some food for thought, but it is my personal one. First of all, the Pope focused on the historic importance of Egypt in the current social and political situation. He talked to the political authorities, and the Pope entrusted them with a very important task, and I quote, the Pope said, Egypt is called upon to condemn and defeat any violence and terrorism. It is called upon to donate the seed of peace to all the hearts who are hungry for peaceful coexistence, jobs, and human education. And then he said, we can expect a lot from great nations. In order to understand the importance of Francis' words, we have to remember the national awareness of Egyptians, which has been developed over thousands of years of civilization, from the pharaohs onwards. As the Pope said, Misr al-Dunya, Masrum al-Dunya, Egypt is the mother of the universe. This is what they say. However, we can claim that the Pope has also mentioned the geopolitical concept and the concept of periphery. In the relations with Islam, the Pope is focusing on a very big nation from a demographic point of view. Egypt has 100 million inhabitants, but at the same time, it is poorer than other countries. It is a society where there's a wide tradition, there's a long tradition of coexistence among peoples, sometimes conflicts between Muslims and Christians. Something similar had happened even during the visits to other countries with the same characteristics, where there were not rich societies but poor ones, and where there was some positive coexistence between Christians and Muslims, such as Albania, Bosnia, and the Central African Republic. The danger of growth of fundamentalism is very real in those countries, starting from preachers supported and trained in the richest Arabian countries that can export fundamentalism. So the Pope got in contact with political and religious authorities, and he went to Azhar University, and he pronounced many harsh words on terrorism and the forms of violence justified by religion. He launched an appeal to take away fundamentalists' social legitimacy or religious legitimacy. The Pope said at the university, and I quote, "We have the duty to unveil the sellers of illusions on the beyond, on what is beyond, preaching hatred to steal simple people their life and their right to live with dignity, taking them away the ability to choose with freedom and to believe with responsibility." End of quote. Francis did not just denounce fundamentalism, although this is a clear concern of the whole world, both in Egypt and in Spain. Barcelona is just the last episode of violence, of terrorism. Then there's a third important aspect on the Pope's journey, as in there's a new way of living the religious experience. He gave some hints when celebrating the Mass with Egyptian Catholics, where he said, and I quote, "The only permitted extremism for believers is the one connected to charity. Any other extremism that does not come from God, and God doesn't like it." And once again, he said, to God, "It is better not to believe than to be a false believer, a hypocrite, because so much religion is not needed if it is not accompanied by faith and charity." I'll be shorter. It seems that these sentences that when were broadcasted throughout Egypt were at the heart of this journey. What effect will they have? What impact will they have? Sometimes social movements can come about and grow little by little. They come out from daily life, and at some point they arrive at institutions. And just one last remark on the visit. Francis' words and gestures are in line with the peaceful evidence of the Orthodox Copt Christian. When talking about blood ecumenism approaching Catholics and Copts, this is no rhetoric. Pope Tawadros II recently said, "Terrorists will see this immense forgiveness that the Copts are offering every time they are struck. Tolerance before the violence of the bad. I'm sure that their hearts will be moving." So Pope Francis and Pope Tawadros came to a common declaration. This interreligious dialogue, this ecumenical dialogue, should be promoted, should be continued. Only by so doing, we will be able to reach peace and social progress in this century, where there has already been a lot of sufferings. As for the Christians, we need to say before anything, and before our Muslim brothers, first of all, that truth and freedom are strictly intertwined, and they occur together, they stay together or fall together. The most perfect relation is the one based on love. Truth can only win. The victory of truth and love. This is what St. Augustine said. The Pope's journey has questioned our stereotypes of living the faith. Therefore, we needed to educate, to get educated for conversion. Any meeting changes the parties at the meeting. Had I not come to Cairo 11 years ago, probably I wouldn't be here. Will it be possible for all of us to change? so that our identity can contribute to the life of all. Many Christian brothers from the East and the West, many of our friends, Muslim friends and friends from Egypt just expect that. Thank you.
Grazie a Don Prades per mettere.
Thank you very much to Father Prades for setting the context for Europe and for the Pope's journey to Egypt, and for focusing on the difficulties stemming from the European reality and the difficulties also stemming from the Islam. The way it is practiced today. So from this context, we go to the Egyptian context. Yesterday, talking with my dearest friend Sahid Mahmoud, well, he said a very interesting thing. He said, not even the most fundamentalist who denies Christianity can cut away from his own personal history the Christian. The Christian is always present. Maybe a colleague, a schoolmate, a neighbor. A Christian is always present. And this word "personal" is our hope. It will it will be very difficult to integrate Islam, but it is possible to integrate the Muslims. And the evidence of this can be seen in what we all witnessed in the Pope's journey to Egypt. And Sahid Mahmoud will talk about it. I am impressed now that I am addressing this audience who had listened to Chomsky, to the Dalai Lama, and other great people before me, but I am reassured of the fact that I will talk about the Pope Francis, a man who always inspires serenity. I am also reassured by the fact that I am sitting on the side of another academic pope. I'm referring to Mr. Feki, sitting beside me. I would like to thank my friend Wael Farouq, who has introduced me, and he made me a candidate to talk, to speak before you. Perhaps the previous speaker has described exhaustively the position or the role played by religion in the societies in the past and at present. However, I would like to go back to these philosophical thoughts by mentioning some facts which are related to Egypt. There's a text that reads, "The world has changed in 30 hours." I'm talking about the 10 hours more or less than the Pope spent in Egypt, which transformed radically the whole country. In this page, you can find the description of the 30 hours that Pope Francis spent in Egypt. My title should be Spiritual Diplomacy. This should be the title of my presentation. And I apologize with Mr. Al-Feki when I express this concept, because this is a concept which is being experimented now that the traditional diplomacy has failed, failing to propose solutions. Well, now there are other alternatives. Popular diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and I would like to propose spiritual diplomacy. According to which people whose existence is inspired by religion, or people having religious important tasks, I'm referring to the Pope, to Pope Francis or Al-Azhar in Egypt. But these points, these pillars, these points of reference may give a lot to the world. They may empower the world to face and to tackle fear, as the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said yesterday. The Pope's journey, Pope's visit to Egypt was a gift from heaven. It was a gift from heaven because the timing was a critical one. Egypt, 2 weeks before the Pope arrived, had been attacked twice against, there were 2 terrorist attacks against 2 churches. When Pope Francis insisted to come to Egypt, this not only reassured the Egyptian Christians, but also the entire world and the entire Egypt. Before Pope Francis came to Egypt, but when we knew the Pope would come, well, we were all very happy because his past clearly indicated that we would have welcomed a very important, a great personality. We had already read the Pope's opinion on refugees from Syria, on migrants, and everybody was impressed when during the Holy Thursday, the Pope Francis had washed the feet of some prisoners. One of them is a Muslim. This picture was relaunched, and it was a focus of many people's attention in the social media. In this picture, you can see the Pope Francis washing the feet of a Muslim man. The majority of Egyptians is Muslim, as you know. And the majority of Egyptians, when the Pope decided to come to Egypt, had adopted the same motto of the visit, brotherhood. That was a key word. And this tweet by Pope Francis, when he stated, "I'm going to visit Egypt tomorrow as a pilgrim of peace," this tweet was retweeted a lot on the various social media. And then Mr. Feki told me just a few minutes ago that Pope Francis' journey was historic. It is true that in Egypt we always talk about history. Whatever the topic, we always end by talking about history. But this visit of Pope Francis was really historic. The picture you see beside the tweet is a drawing made by a Muslim pupil. In her imagination, the Pope is portrayed along with the dove of peace in her hand. His visit was a gift. Why was it a gift from heaven? Because while in the world everybody is repeating that that in Egypt the situation was not stable, well, the Pope came, he reassured the Christians, and he stressed once again that terrorism has nothing to do with a certain religion. His picture with the great Imam of Al-Azhar is a further evidence of this. Terrorism has nothing to do with no religion, and it has nothing to do with Islam as a religion. The problem is not Islam. The problem is not religion. Religion is part of the solution. Yet, the funniest fact is that the press, all the major newspapers of Egypt, on the right-hand side you can see the first page, the headline of Al-Ahram, a newspaper founded 150 years ago. Those days' edition was all full of a single topic: the Pope from the Vatican. This is the title. Those who know the souls of the Egyptians, well, they also know that they are the population who is the most addicted to the social media. And the BBC also stressed this. In 30 hours, there were 45,000 tweets on Twitter and on Facebook, and posts on Facebook on the visit by Pope Francis, in which people expressed their hopes following the visit of Pope Francis. And then there were posters placed along the major streets, major roads of Egypt. Here you can see a bus. Buses are always overcrowded, so you can see the writings on the buses. And this is a poster in French, in English, on the journey, on the apostolic visit of Pope Francis. But I would like to insist on the social media. The social media are the press of the largest audience, not the traditional press. Therefore, 40,000 tweets in 30 hours. Well, this is a record. 450,000 tweets. The speaker corrects himself. But those who read Arabic know that the Egyptians repeated again and again that that Pope Francis' visit to Egypt was a gift. It was a blessing. This gift from heaven made it possible to associate the Pope with the historical aspects of Egypt. You can see the Pope and the pyramids in the background. And in the bottom part, you can see a picture of Pope Francis with Pope Taurus II. So this concept of blessing lasted for a little bit of time. And but people used to say that Pope Francis' visit to Egypt was like a miracle. And the papers reported about graces, miracles obtained. Mrs. Mariam was in a place where the Pope was passing by. The Pope touched her, and she felt a serenity passing through her body when the Pope slightly touched her. I will not dwell on other details. But I would like to say that when the Pope prayed in the stadium of the Cairo, it is a stadium owned by the Ministry of Defense. Those who know Egypt also know that that stadium was connected with an attack in the past in which many young people had died. The Egyptians now no longer associate the stadium with that massacre. They associate the stadium with a stadium in which Pope Francis has prayed, in the same place where the manslaughter had occurred. This also brought serenity. And it brought a new image to a place linked to a violent action in the past. Therefore, the Pope Francis, strived for the cause of the Catholics, of Catholic people in Egypt, There were many TV meetings, TV programs stating the presence of Catholic people in the Egyptian society and the links of Egyptian society with the Catholics. But I would like to repeat once again that this visit brought lots of serenity, and this enabled to resume pilgrimages in Egypt to the monastery of St. Catherine on the Mount Sinai. This was one of the positive repercussions of the visit of Pope Francis. Then there were meetings between the President Al-Sisi and Pope Francis. President Al-Sisi also evaluated the visit and its impact very positively. This prayer in the stadium gave such a popularity to Pope Francis, which resembles the popularity of the most famous Egyptian soccer players. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Un popolo.
Okay. What you've just said is really very, very moving. Because what the people did, the people talking about miracles, small miracles that the Pope did. Watching the Mass, looking at the Mass that the Pope made, which is the biggest Mass ever made in Egypt, that was broadcasted to many Islamic countries in Arabic. So, this presence of the Pope does not deny reality, but actually it changes the look at reality. A place where there was a massacre, where many young people died. Now, the Egyptians look at the Pope in the same place, and they chose to make a prayer in this place, as if it was a prayer for these victims. So this change of look at reality, this is what generates hope. And no one can speak better about hope than Professor Mostafa El-Feki on hope generated by the presence of the Pope in Egypt. I give you the floor.
I would like to start by thanking you, my good friend, Dr. Wael Farouq. And I was invited several times to different seminars and institutions. But this time I feel it's different. It reminds me of Davos. If Davos is concentrating on political and economical issues, the concentration here is on cultural and religious matters. This is very important by all means. I thank you for this invitation. In particular, it's coming in a very critical timing. You know that terror is hitting us everywhere and hitting us regardless to religion, color, origin, or whatever it is. You can find him in Barcelona, in Istanbul, in Cairo, in London, in Paris, in Brussels. He is targeting all the humankind everywhere. I'm one of those who were specialized in comparative religions as an introduction to my thesis for Christian minorities in the Middle East, with a special reference on Copts in Egypt. And I remember very well that we used to say that religions are movements of reform. Apart from the spiritual side of religion, it's a movement for reform, to upgrade the standard of human being and to give them more values they need. Judaism is like that, Christianity is like that, Islam is like that. Even the non-Abraham religions, the three ones, the Asian religions are also asking for that. I lived in India and I know the noble ideas of Buddhism and Hinduism and all other religions. That's why we, for the human kind in general, these teachings are general, should be accepted by us all. We shouldn't make any differences among us because of our different religions at all. In our Quran, God said, I am able to make you all in one religion. But the diversity, the difference between you is the colorful of life for the human being in the world. Being a God believer, whatever the religion is great. Just imagine if two persons were lost in the desert. One of them is a God believer. He has a faith, and the other one is not. I can assure you that the God believer will survive longer and he may be saved. But the other one with no hope, with no belief of God or faith in religion, will deteriorate quickly and he will never be able to last longer. That's why if you even look to it from the practical point of view, you will find that belief keeps the human being in a better shape than not being a believer. In Egypt, my own country, religions are deeply rooted. We are a country where Akhenaton, one of the old pharaohs, discovered by nature that there is one God. And he started to talk about that. That's why Egyptians, if you don't know, are one of the most religious nations on earth. When Alexander the Great invaded Egypt, he was advised by his advisors to go straight away to the pharaonic temple in Siwa and to announce himself as a son of God, to be very close to the hearts of Egyptians. Napoleon Bonaparte, after many centuries, also when he went to Egypt, he was asked to talk about Islam, the religion of the majority of Egyptians. They told him this is the only way to reach their hearts. That's why religions are highly respected in our part of the world. Can you imagine, I don't know if you know or not, that in Cairo, as a Muslim city, we have 9 synagogues for the Jews, well maintained, in a good shape, and everybody can go there and practice his prayers? No, it was not touched in 1956, in 1967, in 1973, while we have wars with Israel, because we do believe in God and in religions. Churches, we have thousands of them. We have the biggest monasteries in the world, in Asyut and in Upper Egypt and in the north, because we believe many Muslims, they go to the church asking for the blessings and for the priest to touch their sons and daughters. He said something like that, Professor Farouq, to save their lives. Nasser used to ask the Pope of the Orthodox, Nasser was a Muslim leader, of course, to come and see his son while he was sick, just to give him the blessings and to save his life. This is us. There is no naturally any difference. What you see now is not Egyptians. They are not Muslims. This is something different completely. These people are universal made. Those who are not happy for any reason, whatever it is, they go out and they start practicing violence against us all, regardless to our religion. The great Pope, when he came to Egypt I had the honor to be invited to his reception with the Egyptian president. He said, I came to Egypt as a pilgrim. Can you imagine? You know why? Because Egypt is the land of Moses. When he talked to God in Sinai, it's the land where the Holy Family has crossed the country from the east to the south. It's also the country which received Islam afterwards. That's why it's a blessed land. And the Pope came in a very difficult time. As Mr. Ali has just said, Mr. Mahmoud, everybody said he will never come. And you know, rumors started to be spread out that because of stability and security, after bombing 2 churches, the Pope is advised not to come. But the great religious, spiritual leader decided to do it. In the sake of Egypt, in the sake of Muslims and Christians in the area, and to cover all these stories by his own blessings and his spiritual atmosphere he is going to bring to the place. And this is exactly what happened. His visit was a big slap to terror in the region. And it was a great message to Christians in the Middle East in general. Because you don't know how much they have suffered in the last 3 decades in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, in other countries, maybe in Egypt also, because of those who are narrow-minded and they are trying to squeeze them and to put them under pressure. But I can assure you that the majority of Muslims are supporting them, and we feel that they are an integral part of our land, and they should keep their homeland and not to leave. I'm sad to say, I'm sad to tell you, frankly, that tens of thousands of Arab Christians have left their homeland in the last 2 decades. It's very sad to say that, but this is a fact. Al-Azhar, the biggest Islamic center in Cairo, once decided to have what we call the House of Family for Muslims and Christians. This because an accident happened against a church in Iraq. That's why we feel in Egypt how our brothers Christians everywhere in the Arab world are suffering. Their problems is beyond imagining. They have paid a very high price. That's why we are, as broad-minded and tolerant Muslims, we are ready to fight for them and to give them their own rights in their own land. Copts, as an example in Egypt, they are the owners of the land. Maybe I'm coming from a Christian family, and after Islam I accepted the religion. But they are the most deeply rooted people in the country. Nobody can argue. This is their own land without any discussion. The Pope has met the Grand Sheikh, the Imam of Al-Azhar, and also he had met the great Pope of the Egyptian Orthodox, the new one after late Pope Shenouda, who was a very close friend of mine. The new one also is a very close friend of mine. He is the one who said, listen to what he has said. He said, to keep our homeland without churches is better than having our churches with losing our homeland. Look to the meaning. He believes in his own country, regardless to the differences of religion. The man is teaching us how to be tolerant, and he is following the same steps of the great Pope Francis, who came to our country, and he has shown modesty, tolerance, open mind, and he spoke to everyone in a way which has created the atmosphere of love and stability in the whole region. As it was said, it was a big gift to Egypt, the visit of Pope Francis, because it came in a very difficult time, and also it was well received by Muslims before Christians. In the stadium in Cairo, we had nearly 100,000 Egyptians there. Maybe majority of them are Muslims, but we want to welcome a message by a man who is carrying love and tolerance and stability to us all, Muslims and Christians and even Jews. Ladies and gentlemen, this is in brief the main points I would like to mention in this meeting. And being as the director of Biblioteca Alexandrina, I would like to assure you that Alexandria, which was the city of diversity of Arabs, Greeks, Italians, Armenians, Jews, 1 century ago, just remember how it was Alexandria. I can assure you that it will be back again to the same image we have lost. It will receive again all its people, regardless to any other differences, because we are all coming from the same stock and our end will be the same. I would like to thank you all.
Molto interessante.
What Professor Feki is very interesting, and especially when he reminded us all that the house of the family, of the Egyptian family, which was composed of Muslims and Christians, was founded as an answer to the drama of the Christians. And I would like to remind you that these Christians were not killed because of a natural catastrophe. These Christians were confronted with a choice, and they chose. They made a decision. In order to avoid the penalty and all the suffering, they only had to state some words. They could have saved their job, the house, everything. But they decided to leave everything, even their shoes, to keep their faith. Well, this thing indicates a testimony. And for this reason, today we are talking about religions that are able to generate hope. Why are they able to generate hope? Not because they have answers to these difficult questions proposed to us by Father Javier Prades. Not because they can protect us from violence, but because only religion is able to create the room and the space for this testimony to be given. Religion is the only room, the only space where it is possible to see all the good and all the desire for good which exists in the heart of man. I remember well the Egyptian Revolution, 25th of January 2011. Almost 3 weeks earlier, the most asked question in the Egyptian media was, is it the case for an Egyptian to wish a Christian, to make a Christian the best wishes for Christmas? It was considered as a wrong action. 3 weeks later, in the Tahrir Square, I saw with my own eyes that the bodies of Muslims became a church, because during the Mass, the Muslims used their own bodies to form a chain for Christians to be able to celebrate the Mass, the Holy Mass. On Friday, the same thing happened. The Christians created a human change and they became a mosque for the Muslims so that the Muslims could pray during Friday. So when there is a desire for this liberty, when there is a presence of a certain religiosity, hope can stem. Hope can find a way to be revived, and we can re-earn the good we inherited from our fathers. As my friend Mahmoud showed at the beginning, when the Pope came to Cairo, everywhere you could see images, pictures of the Pope, of Pope Francis in his white garments, and the pyramids and the Dove of Peace. Those were the symbols for the Egyptians. Those symbols represent their hopes. Yet the presence of Pope Francis in Egypt, his humbleness, his sincere love for everybody, the embrace with the great Imam made the Egyptians remember about the presence of Saint Francis in Egypt, and the icon, the ancient icon, emerged once again. The icon of Saint Francis of Assisi embracing the Sultan. So the Pope Francis' presence revived this memory. He made history presence. History became topical again. This is a condition for hope. There is no future without a certain identity. Therefore, I would like to thank wholeheartedly all the speakers, and I would like to remind you that when I was talking with them yesterday, well, they were impressed by the meeting of Rimini because, well, they are great intellectuals, and therefore they've studied profoundly the history of Europe. They've visited most of European countries, and I've always noted that in Europe there is a great idea which gives rise to a movement, to a people, to a society. But what they saw here at the Rimini meeting is that there is a people from which lots of ideas come. This is a great gift, and in order to keep this gift alive, we must donate to the meeting. We must make a donation to the meeting because we need to keep this space open, and we must maintain hope. We are Egyptians. We come from another reality. We come from another country. We come from another world. But what we see here at the Rimini meeting is real, is really dearest to us all because we can touch hope here at the Rimini meeting. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the evening.